Welcome to Conversations with the Commish. I'm pleased to welcome Beth Goetz, Director of Athletics at Ball State University. Beth is coming to the conclusion of her first year at Ball State. Welcome, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
Let's talk about that. You've been there almost a year, and when we think about taking a job, we get focused on someone's got to offer you the position. But there's not only the process of the institution offering the candidate position, the candidate's looking around too and saying, is this a place that I want to be? And so as you were going through this process, what are the things you're looking at and trying to check off your list that says, this might be a place I want to work?
Yeah, that's, it's a really important question, I think, for any position that we're going to take. But for me personally, I think it's really about alignment. So, does it align with your values, the direction that you want to go in? And an opportunity to be able to impact where that institution currently is. So, for me, Ball State had that. It's a values-based public institution, and so they really live the values of beneficence, and under the leadership of President Mearns, it was just a really attractive opportunity for me from an institutional perspective, and certainly the level of athletics and competitiveness within the Mid-American Conference made it a really intriguing institutional fit for me.
How do you discern some of those things, particularly along the values line? How do you, either through reading materials or interacting with whatever constituent groups you are, how do you discern that there's alignment?
Yeah, you really have to do your research. It's not something that comes out necessarily in an interview process. That's not always where you're going to get all of your information. So I think it's really the behind the scenes things that you're doing, conversations that you might have with a search firm in this case, with individuals that have been employed there previously, and really engaging in as much of that sort of behind the scenes background look at an institution as you can.
If you can remember, what was the best question you got during the search process?
Oh, that's a tough one. Probably the most interesting and most repetitive question that I got with every group I had an opportunity to meet with, everybody wants to know what it's like to work with Geno Auriemma. And so it was funny because you're anticipating all these questions about how maybe I interacted with women's basketball or maybe how I supported them, but everybody was just really curious about, and then a few other coaches that I've had an opportunity to work with along the way.
You've had an interesting career leading into this position. You were a college soccer player. Go to Brevard, go to Clemson, graduate from Clemson. You go to Missouri St. Louis, graduate work, assistant coach, very quickly become a head coach for about a decade. Then you move into administrative work there. Then you're off to Butler as an associate AD. Then you're off to Minnesota as an associate AD, and then interim director of athletics. And then to UConn as chief operating officer. At what point along that continuum did you say, I think I want to be an athletics director?
It wasn't always a part of the plan. Well, neither was coaching for that matter, but I had some wonderful coaches of my own that sort of gave me a gentle nudge in that direction and really gave me an opportunity to find my passion in college athletics. But I think when it really became a reality for me was probably with the opportunity I had at University of Minnesota to step into that chair. And although the circumstances were not exactly what any of us would have chosen, over the course of that year, the way that we were able to impact our student athletes and really support our coaches during what was in some ways a difficult time. They were still having great success on the field and in the classroom, but it was really the time where I thought, hey, this is something I really think I have the ability to do and can contribute in this way. So if the right opportunity presented itself, I'd have an interest.
You mentioned Minnesota, and as you stepped in, the department was in a bit of a crisis. And there's this great saying about never let a good crisis go to waste. Yeah. And so what did you do intentional to try and calm the waters, or maybe reverse course or change the ship a little bit because of that?
Yeah, well, that was the key right there, is to figure out how to provide the most consistent stable environment for our student athletes and our coaches as you can, because nothing else stopped. Even though you may have had these outside influences and investigations and those types of things going on, that didn't change the need to make sure the experience for the student athlete who was going to compete on Saturday or compete for a championship wasn't the most important thing to us, because that didn't change. And so, really, I think our approach, and I say ours because this wasn't about my leadership, it was a component of a leadership team, was to be as transparent as we could be, to make sure that we eliminated any barriers in terms of communication, and so that they could see that the path forward, our focus was still on the student athletes and on providing a great experience for them on and off the field. The other piece of that personally was to make sure I utilized all the resources I could externally, to say, hey, what advice would you have, and how can I lean on others in the industry who had been through similar situations before, and take that and put it into action at Minnesota.
How would you describe your administrative style?
Very collaborative. I think, one of the things I thrive on, and partly because I've had an opportunity to be involved in these type of leadership teams, but I just really think that the more diversity of opinions that you have, diversity of thought, that when you can have respectful, honest debate around the strategic direction of an institution, around specific decisions that you have, I think you're going to come up with the right answer more often than not. And so I really encourage that, and just thrive on being a part of having everyone contribute in every aspect of decision making across the department.
What's a typical day like for you?
I'm not sure anyone in our industry says there's a typical day, but you're engaging in with a handful of different constituents at each and every moment, whether that be your student athletes and your coaches, which is obviously the place you love to spend the most time. You're engaging with folks across campus in order to make sure the organization is functioning and supporting the university mission, and then certainly the engagement that we have regularly with alums and donors and generous supporters of our program. And so trying to figure out how to fit all that in and where your priority is in a given day or a given week is really how the schedule plays out.
As we've mentioned, you're coming up on the milestone of a year in the position. Has the year met your expectations?
Well, this is about the time where you're really doing a lot of reflecting in that area, and I tell you, it just flies by. I can hardly believe it's coming upon that mark. But I've just been so grateful for the way that the Ball State community and the Mid-American community and everybody has embraced and welcomed me, and really given me a lot of support as I've made the transition. So I've really enjoyed that, and believe we've started to be able to make an impact in some areas, but you certainly look back and say, hey, where do we still need to continue to make strides, and what can we do differently as we move into year two?
As you evaluate coaches, what are the things you look at?
Well, I usually talk through our coaches with the things, with each coach, things that are really most important to us. And they're not always equally weighted, but they all are very, very important. And certainly that falls into the categories of competitive excellence, academic excellence, providing a great student-athlete experience, engagement, and that means engagement in the department, across campus and in the community, and then overall program management. So that's hiring staff, how they're managing their budgets, all of those different types of areas I think are all critically important when you're evaluating a coach.
When is it more important for you to be in the locker room? After a win or after a loss?
Oh, I think after a loss, without hesitation. I think, it's we're all quick to jump on board when things are going well, but I think it's really showing up when things are difficult that I think is most meaningful to a student athlete or to a coach. And it's I think why I pride myself on making sure that we show up at practice sessions. It's not just about seeing them compete in the biggest limelight, on Saturday at a football game or at a softball game on the weekend. It's being there when they're putting in the work, and it's great to celebrate with them, and you love those moments. But I think it means a lot more when you're there in the trenches.
You've been a student athlete, soccer player, been a coach. How have those experiences shaped kind of what you've evolved into. And does that bring you a level of credibility with a couple of the constituent groups you have to deal with?
Yeah. Well, I really value that experience for multiple reasons. I mean, I can't say enough how impactful it was for me in my development personally and just growth to participate in college athletics. So much so, I never left, clearly. But the impact that coaches have had on my trajectory in my career and continue to this day has always been really meaningful as a student athlete. So, you know, I know what it means to be successful, to fail, to have to put in the time to compete and manage your academics, and all of those same things I learned as a coach. You know, you learn what it's like to lose a top recruit. Or maybe to not have all the resources that you would like to have to compete and have to be really creative to maneuver. So I do think those experiences are helpful in providing perspective for me as I try and support our staff. And I do think it does provide some level of credibility in that they understand I've been in that seat before. I certainly don't know exactly what they're going through today, but it can have empathy to help them work through some of those situations.
If you weren't doing what you were doing now, if you weren't in athletics, what would you probably be doing? What had you intended to do when you went to college?
So I was going to be a therapist. So I got my master's in counseling. It turns out that's more relevant than we all hoped it would be. But that was the original plan. So I think I'd be, you know, still in education, social services area, trying to support young people.
Would lead one to believe you spend a lot of time listening.
Which is the most important part of the job, I think, most any job.
What is the value of participating in intercollegiate athletics?
Yeah, I think it is really allows you to sort of build and enhance what is already a transformative time in a young person's life. So it's in addition to the things they already get on campus, but they're doing that in a way that's heavily scrutinized with more pressures on them from time demand standpoint, from a competitive standpoint. And the ability to function within that environment and succeed in that environment, I think really prepares them for the future and for what they're going to experience in their future careers.
When you were being interviewed for the position, did anybody go to the area? What do you know about football?
I don't think that was a question that they focused too much on in my interview, but I do get that a lot. You know, as a female in this industry, I've been very intentional about trying to be engaged in areas where there could be a perception that there would be a gap. And so engaging with teams and coaches and doing that within college athletics. I've had some opportunities to engage outside of college athletics as well, and building relationships there. But so I think, you know, with anything that we don't have direct experience in, I think we have to demonstrate that we're willing to listen and to learn and can be supportive. As we all know, in many ways, supporting one sport is not all that much different from supporting another. But I think you've got to be intentional about how you interact, particularly with a high-profile sport like football.
Principles of administration or principles of leadership tend to be kind of universal, don't they? Mm-hmm. Do you have some mentors?
I do. I've been really fortunate. I think I've got multiple mentors and have had throughout my career. Certainly in the most recent history, an athletic director that I worked for at the University of Connecticut, David Benedict, has been just a wonderful support, and I learned so much from him. And just the ability, he was so open to having me engaged in things that sometimes you otherwise don't get experience in. And so I've really appreciated his guidance. Jim Phillips at Northwestern has just been so generous with his time. He was a critical support for me during the year at Minnesota, and always reaches out, still reaches out to make sure that I've been able to continue my growth and feel supported from the outside. And whether it's my college coaches and other folks I've worked with throughout, almost 2 decades now, I just feel really fortunate to have that level of resource and people that care about the work that I do.
Are there a couple things you look back over this year and go, wow, I'm really proud we got that accomplished in a fairly short period of time?
Yeah, I'd probably point to a couple things, and I think two of them are really relevant in the conversation of student-athlete welfare and experience today. The first, and this is really a collaborative effort, and we continue, there's lots of work to be done here, but continue to work closely and partner closely with campus in trying to figure out how to support the mental health needs of our student-athletes. To say where we need to be would be really short-sighted, but I do think we continue to make strides. I think that partnership that we have with our campus counseling center is stronger than it's ever been. And our struggles in athletics are no different than the struggles that campuses feel in general. But we need to continue to provide those resources and make them available. The second piece, I think, is in and around things that are directly going to impact our students' abilities to perform. And so we've been able to, through creative funding and reallocating resources, invest more in strength and conditioning staff, which certainly lends itself to competitive needs, but also is very important from a safety standpoint. We're going to hire another full-time athletic trainer. And again, I think those things in and around the experience are just so important for the wellness of our student athletes overall. And the other component of that is nutrition. And we've been put some plans in place that I think will allow us to enhance that opportunity for them as well. So I think we're really proud of finding ways to impact the students directly in ways that are going to be meaningful for them here.
What value does intercollegiate athletics bring to the institution?
Yeah, I think that happens on lots of levels. Everybody talks about, I think at every institution, the pride and spirit and the conduit that can provide for the, for Ball State in our case. And I think, the branding and the opportunity that athletics brings to be able to tell the university story. It's not just the athletic story. It's the university story that can be told through the opportunities that we have on a larger platform. So I think that's really important. I think the other piece, and really I think this is the direction that athletics is going to move in, particularly at institutions that are similar to ours, is how can we be impactful to the institutional mission? And that can be done through lots of partnerships with academic units. I think we have some great examples of that at Ball State. With our communication department and SportsLink, some of the work we do with exercise science and partnerships, new partnerships we have with nutrition and dietary sciences. And so I think when we can use that resource to really further the general mission of the institution, that's great value for everybody involved.
You've been appointed to the NCAA Division I Women's Basketball Committee, which speaks to a little bit of what people think about you in this industry. What do you anticipate as you head into your first year of that?
Well, I'm just so grateful to the MAC and to the committee for this opportunity. I think it's going to be a great way to impact one of our premier sports. Across the NCAA landscape, and at a time where I think, it's introspection about how we operate and how we support our student athletes and championships in that area is really critical, because as we know, the landscape is changing, and we need to figure out how best to support women's basketball as a whole. So I'm really excited about that. I've reached out to a handful of individuals, both on the men's committee and the women's committee, to sort of ask about how what to anticipate and how to manage the workload and the responsibility that goes with that. But it's I'm really looking forward to the opportunity to engage with such a great group of individuals that are committed to the game.
Moving over from an associate AD to be the AD, has anything surprised you?
Well, this may be true in any new position that you take, but I think you sort of come with this list of things that you think you're going to spend a lot of time on, and it's It's not usually those that take the most of your focus. I think it's just the nuances of what pops up day to day that drive your attention. And so whether that's a dynamic that's happening with an institution, and a lot of these are really great dynamics. In our case, we're really engaged with the Muncie community. That's an initiative of our institution, and so it's a fun opportunity to engage and figure out how to make that a priority within our unit, and how to further that relationship that exists with our school system and the community as a whole. But it's really those unanticipated things that are going to derail your schedule that we talked about a little bit earlier. I'm not sure there's much preparation that can be done other than to know, hey, this is now a priority for us and we need to work our way through.
As you come into a new position, you probably have a little bit of a game plan in mind for the first 3 months or 6 months.
Yeah.
Okay, having done that, what would you do differently?
Yeah, I did walk in with a sort of a 90-day plan, and I think those are great outlines, and I would continue to do that, but you do have to tweak those quite a bit just because every institution, although great similarities, they're just very unique. I think the one area I would definitely focus on earlier is really pushing to engage more with our external community. Starting in the summer, that was a little bit harder to wrap our arms around. Lots of folks don't spend the summer locally, and so there was a lot of travel. But I think I would have placed a lot more emphasis on making sure if some of our key supporters weren't local, that I would have gotten out to where they were a little bit sooner than I actually had an opportunity to do so.
How do you ensure that your president is kept in the loop of the inner workings of your department?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to start by saying I just feel incredibly fortunate to have the opportunity to work under the leadership of President Mearns. He is very open and receptive, and we have, regularly scheduled every 2 weeks we have meetings, but he is very accessible. And so that open line of communication is so critical. And sometimes it's just, hey, I want to shoot him a quick text to make sure he's in the loop on something. And sometimes it's a part of an agenda where we're going to have a deeper conversation. But I think operating in a way that he is always aware of what's up and coming, what I foresee our challenges or our opportunities to be, and so that we can ensure that we've got alignment on what that path should look like moving forward.
In closing, define success.
Well, I think success is in what we see, in the opportunities we see our student athletes have after they walk across the stage. It's really about, did we prepare them for the next stage of their life? And I think college athletics does that in a very unique way. And so when we get to see them achieve while they're on campus, but that achievement leads to great things for them upon graduation, I think that's what's really meaningful to all of us that are involved.
Beth, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm glad to be here. I appreciate the opportunity.
Thanks for joining us on Conversations with the Commish.